Chapter 32, Story Adaptation, Myths and Stories, Part 4. A Rose by Any Other Name. The great bard dispelled the myth of nominalism through the lips of the fictional Juliet Capulet, a wise young woman who could see that names do not make monsters out of men. The common paraphrase, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, refers to Romeo, her love, who is the unfortunate heir of her family's rival clan. Let's practice the exercise of changing a name. Perhaps instead of Montague, Romeo was the son of some other house of Verona, one in good standing with the Capulets. What would happen? Juliet would love him just the same, and their life would be happy and far less tragic. It wouldn't make much of a play. Is there a name that could make Juliet love him any less? The answer seems to be no, because the Montagues were already her family's fiercest rivals. For Juliet to reject Romeo, either he or she would have to change not in name, but in essence. The dutiful daughter or son who could not overlook a family rivalry would be incapable of capturing the heart of the true Romeo or Juliet. For Shakespeare's story to work and be a story, all the tragic elements must be in place. You can change Capulets and Montagues to sharks and jets, but there's an internal logic that must be the same. A disapproving father-in-law, in the style of Archie Bunker, is like a cross and with a very acute intersection. There's some incongruity, but he still lets Meathead live in his house. Romeo and Juliet is a cross at 90 degrees. When the two lines are completely aligned, a happy marriage between two families that get along, or completely separate, like the Hatfields and McCoys, the symbol ceases to be what it is. A simple story of star-crossed lovers has few enough elements to make the point clear. Yet the skill of discerning the real from the nominal is far more difficult in real life. Each additional category or division added to the narrative brings another layer of complexity, and the truth becomes foggier. The ultimate expression of this narrative fog is how we view the world itself, as presented from various points of view. Right and left, red and blue, good and evil, all are jumbled together in each person and each issue. The more complex the world gets, the more appealing it becomes to align ourselves with a tribal system that provides the answers. A political party, a religious tradition, or an ideological movement provides easy answers to a whole slate of questions. To align ourselves with such movements means that questioning a single issue puts us at odds with a whole movement, even when the tribe we question is our own. This toxic solidarity makes it impossible to resolve anything at the higher levels of societal organization. The mass confusion causes tribes of all sorts to bring flamethrowers and wrecking balls to argue issues where nuance and precision are desperately needed. This makes it understandably difficult for a person to form solid convictions on any issues. There is no source of information free from tribal bias of one kind or another. A whole spectrum of narratives ranging from the unbelievable to the undeniable have been presented as scientific consensus and top-tier reporting in one time and place, and as conspiracy theories in others. Even the biblical stories are presented through a framework of filters intended to shape the perspective of the reader. Children's Bibles remove the sexual connotations and greatly reduce the violence and suffering present in the text. While protecting youths from subjects inappropriate for their age is not a bad thing, the more egregious sin is framing the stories as simple moral lessons. The truth is that the Bible is incredibly complex in its narrative structure and very rarely gives pronouncements on the moral value of the individuals and their actions. Over its entire corpus, a clearer picture emerges, which makes it easier to understand difficult passages. The original languages of Hebrew and Greek are more ambiguous than English or other languages. This means that translators must make choices about which words they use and the range of possible meanings available to the reader is reduced. All translation is interpretation. This is why so many religious groups insist on the original language being used. Yet, while the problem of bias and interpretation are always present in translation, they are largely overcome by a committee of translators and a multiplicity of translations. The great complexity of the biblical text means that when people try to do it justice, the cumulative result of honest errors does not overshadow the message in its entirety. The gist of most passages will still come through, and the gestalt cannot be warped or eliminated without changing so much of the text that it becomes something completely unrecognizable. The question of realism versus nominalism in the realm of translation, then, becomes about the ability to convey the essence or spirit of a story. Which is closer to the real Jesus of the Gospels, the character named Aslan in the Narnia books, or the character called Jesus in the Queer Gospel? This same issue comes forth in the translation of books into the media of film or television. Interpretation is necessary, but the spirit of the story should come through. The book was better than the movie. The question of adaptation has blossomed into a rich field of study, and there are various opinions about the areas in which it is most important to be faithful. Footnote: Patrick Willems does an excellent job articulating the various positions in this video. See link provided. End footnote. The nature of the subject matter is very important to where and what can be changed. Following the original narrative arc of the Super Mario Bros. Video game, which is virtually non-existent, is not nearly as important as capturing the aesthetics and feel of the characters and environment. When adapting the Bible, almost no one will be satisfied with the best efforts, whether the director attempts to be extremely faithful to the language, historical context, and textual accuracy, such as in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, or attempts to explore the unknown questions through imagination without changing the textual accounts, an approach taken by Dallas Jenkins' Midrash-esque show, The Chosen. Due to its sacred status, of all books, the written text of the Bible will likely never be replaced by a movie or show. Yet, just as books ultimately replaced oral recitation as the common means of sharing stories, movies and television shows have swallowed up most of our recreational reading time. As the canon of important stories expands through history, it is certainly the only way a majority of people will become familiar with certain tales. The Western canon stretches from Homer to the greatest works of the 20th century. Even academics cannot be well versed in every text, and the work of any single author from the past can become the subject of an entire scholarly career. If the raw essence of our most important stories are going to remain a part of the cultural zeitgeist, they will have to be transmitted via film and video. While we never escape the refrain that the book was so much better than the movie, we have to accept that an increasing number of classic books will go unread. Just as no English Bible can perfectly capture the nuance of the original languages, there is always something lost in translation when a book is adapted to film. But the meaning, the essence, the spirit, the telos can be translated in both the gist and the gestalt. Movies are a powerful medium in their own rights. I do believe that Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings captures this essence well enough. What was changed did not destroy the essence of Tolkien's work. Many other classic books have been adapted successfully, often multiple times, following a spectrum of formal to dynamic comparable to the types of Bibles. PBS may produce the version that follows closest to the language and dress of the original, much like a King James version, while Hollywood's looser adaptation translates the emotional essence to impact the modern viewer, like the original spoke to the Elizabethan or Victorian audience, more like the NIV. I wouldn't be writing this book if I didn't think there was still value in printed texts. The experience of reading a book, whether it's over a long weekend or bit by bit over a year, is always a richer experience than watching a 2-hour movie. The two methods of reading above also provide different and worthwhile experiences. One keeps the whole story fresh in your mind, though details can become blurry. The other provides space to ponder each chapter in anticipation of the next. Everyone should read some great books and watch the best or multiple movie adaptations of that book to know what is lost and what is gained through the process. But once that skill is learned, don't feel bad if you only watch the movie for the next one. The Duck Test. As Patrick Willems notes in his video essay on adaptations, the desire for fidelity to the source material is closely correlated with how popular and well-loved a work of fiction is. While the religious communities will likely never be satisfied with biblical adaptations, writers and directors can be true to the spirit of well-loved works of fiction. Works such as To Kill a Mockingbird and Sense and Sensibility have been faithfully adapted to the screen. Many would say that The Godfather surpasses its source material, especially in conjunction with its sequel, which contains the narrative of young Vito Corleone that was cut from the book. Many other adaptations have required creative interpretation to meet the limits of the media, but if done well, audiences are generally forgiving. However, two trends have emerged in the postmodern adaptations of well-written material that are causes for major concern. One is the obligation towards diversity casting. This is not always so egregious, depending on where it is applied. Changing Major Anderson to a woman in Ender's Game did not cause any significant disruption to the plot, yet similar changes can have a much bigger effect when a character's role is more multi-dimensional. The other trend is the subversive plot twist. This is a bigger issue as it changes the structure of the story in its essence. These are the changes that warp the art and architecture of the objective room. The unreliable narrator, the wink and nod, the blurring of good and evil into shades of gray. These changes are aimed at shifting the perception of the audience into questioning the beliefs and values of our culture. In his more philosophical work on which That Hideous Strength was based, The Abolition of Man, Lewis points out the methodology on which this worldview stands, critiquing a book that is ostensibly a text for teaching proper English he calls the Green Book. In their second chapter, Gaius and Titius quote the well-known story of Coleridge at the waterfall. You remember that there were two tourists present, that one called it sublime and the other pretty, and that Coleridge mentally endorsed the first judgment and rejected the second with disgust. Gaius and Titius comment as follows. When the man said, "This is sublime," he appeared to be making a remark about the waterfall. Actually, he was not making a remark about the waterfall, but a remark about his own feelings. What he was saying was, really, I have feelings associated in my mind with the word sublime, or shortly, I have sublime feelings. Here are a good many deep questions settled in a pretty summary fashion, but the authors are not yet finished. They add, the confusion is continually present in language as we use it. We appear to be saying something very important about something, and actually we are only saying something about our own feelings. Footnote from C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man, Chapter 1, Men Without Chests. End footnote. Lewis later emphasizes the subversive trick in their words, that we appear to be saying something very important, when in reality we are only saying something about our own feelings. The underlying message pervades and corrupts almost all media in our day. Appearances are deceptive, and the only thing we can know is our subjective feeling. These ideas and messages come at us not only in classroom textbooks, but through stories told in books, movies, and television. The questioning of all values and absolutes led to a laissez-faire attitude of the baby boomers. While they embraced the freedom of this ideology to explore the sexual revolution of the 1960s, there was no way to put the brakes on what they unleashed. At the same time, our culture insists on replacing male characters with women in adaptations of great books. It can no longer define what a woman is. A list of feminine attributes is foolishly applied, and when an obvious woman fails to meet a single point, we throw out the rubric. Culture mimics the exact words of Gaius and Titius when it claims someone may appear to be male, but the only thing we can know for sure is their subjective experience of manhood or womanhood. This skeptical questioning of reality, the culmination of the serpent's initial question, did God really say, has gone beyond the point of rational explanation to religious obsession. Thus, statements like trans women are not explained, discussed, or defended, but simply stated with belligerent insistence until all dissenters are completely worn out. Footnote. This is not hyperbole. Consistent, repeated interruption of anyone who disagrees is a common tactic by protesters. End footnote. When the Legion insisted all citizens declare Caesar is Lord, it was a logically plausible claim. Someone was Lord, and it may have been Caesar. The absurdity of the mantra, trans women are women, and the similar ones, is that it actually fits the format of a logical contradiction. Non-A is A. When the prefix trans is coming from the terms transsexual and transgender, and in both cases refers to a negation or reversal of the normal of the noun it modifies. The downstream consequence is an erasure of the meaning from language itself. New redundant words like cis are introduced to describe men and women, while cross-gendered language is applied to sexed terms such as female penis or male vagina. Because the telos of this movement was elimination of restrictions to personal and sexual gratification, the function of all body parts is reduced to their sexual function. People simply have holes or orifices, and since the one designed for procreation is exclusive to females, the cis woman's vagina becomes a bonus hole, an idea that also warps our perception of bodily functions like digestion and the elimination of waste. There's a level of common sense that easily makes use of the following heuristic. If it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. Even if the odd cygnet or gosling finds its way into the flock, misidentifying a waterfowl does little practical harm. None of them are dangerous predators. When identification becomes a little murky, the duck test wisdom still holds true. You might have a hard time remembering the distinguishing between a venomous coral snake and a harmless king snake, but it doesn't matter if you treat all snakes as dangerous. When we realize that we are being put in a situation that asks us to question the validity of the duck test, perhaps we should instead question the worldview behind those questions. Why are we being asked to break things down into simpler categories to compare them? In his allegorical work, The Pilgrim's Regress, Lewis points out that the ultimate purpose of this kind of reasoning is to declare reality a lie and permit ourselves to believe falsehoods. Every day, a jailer brought the prisoners their food, and as he laid down the dishes, he would say a word to them. If their meal was flesh, he would remind them that they were eating corpses, or give them some account of the slaughtering. Or, if it was the inwards of some beast, he would read them a lecture in anatomy and show the likeness of the mess to the same parts in themselves, which was all the more easily done because the giant's eyes were always staring into the dungeon at dinner time. Or, if the meal were eggs, he would recall to them that they were eating the menstruum of a verminous fowl and crack a few jokes with the female prisoners. So he went on day by day. Then I dreamed that one day there was nothing but milk for them, and the jailer said as he put down the pipkin, Our relations with the cows are not delicate, as you can easily see if you imagine eating any of her other secretions. Now John had been in the pit a shorter time than any of the others, and at these words something seemed to snap in his head, and he gave a great sigh and suddenly spoke out in a loud, clear voice. Thank heavens! Now at last I know that you are talking nonsense. What do you mean? Said the jailer, wheeling around upon him. You are trying to pretend that unlike things are like. You are trying to make us think that milk is the same sort of thing as sweat or dung. And pray, what difference is there except by custom? Are you a liar or only a fool that you see no difference between that which nature casts out as refuse and that which she stores up as food? So nature is a person then, with purposes and consciousness, said the jailer with a sneer. In fact, a landlady. No doubt it comforts you to imagine you can believe that sort of thing. And he turned to leave the prison with his nose in the air. I know nothing about that, shouted John after him. I am talking of what happens. Milk does feed calves, and dung does not. Footnote from C.S. Lewis, The Pilgrim's Regress, Chapter 8, Parrot Disease. The vital point that breaks the absurdity is in John's imagination of what happens. It may be possible to reduce things to categorical levels that make unlike things appear alike at a certain place and point in time. But when things progress through time, they will either stand or fall. To think is to run things through a narrative. Even in abstraction, we cannot process things without resorting to a linear progression of time. This is why it's so crucial that we test the stories we tell. When we fill our imagination with false narratives, be it in the form of books and movies, news, or social media, we train our own imaginations to expect and believe that our own actions will produce false outcomes. The adulterous adaptation. In a three-way conversation with Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau, cognitive scientist John Vervaeke tried to push back on the idea that everything ultimately comes to us through a narrative, yet ultimately he was unsuccessful. While things like theories and laws may not be narratives, we still explore and understand them through a narrative as they progress through time. When the psalmist speaks of how he delights in the law of the Lord, it's because he has contemplated the consequences and outcomes of obedience and disobedience, and his imagination reveals to him how obedience produces the most satisfying outcomes. These narratives are not linear progression. As we read a law that restricts our ability to work on the Sabbath, we may be frustrated because the progress on our current projects will be stunted. I have a vivid memory of listening to a sermon on the command to keep the Sabbath in the early hours of the morning, when I had taken on the responsibility of a paper route to earn extra money for our wedding. Unlike my day job, the newspapers needed to be delivered every single day. It did not take long to understand the wisdom of taking a regular day of rest. As the pastor talked about our habits of over-relying on caffeine to push through the fog of early mornings and using depressants like alcohol to get to sleep, I completely understood how our rhythms can get so out of whack. My lifestyle closely matched the narrative he described, and I began to delight in the wisdom of the law of God. The great danger of nominalism to reduce things into constructs and attributes has infected many of our ways of thinking. And as our lives have become increasingly image-based, the problem will only increase. Footnote. I explore the nature of images in much greater detail in a later chapter. End note. Although Andrew Tate has made many conflicting statements on the subject of sex and women, his popularity among young men makes an examination of his statements worth consideration. In response to a poll about whether men would rather sleep with a transsexual 10 or a cis 1, he berated the majority of men who said they preferred a real woman for thinking they don't want to be gay, for not thinking about the question, by comparing Megan Fox with a dick to Hulk Hogan with a pussy. The nominalist categorical approach to thinking about such things not only has him redefining what it means to be a man or woman, but what it means to be gay or straight. To imagine a woman that is a one as looking like Hulk Hogan is also very revealing. Why would a very masculine man be the definition of an ugly woman? In many regards, there is more similarity between Hulk Hogan and Megan Fox than between a beautiful woman and a truly ugly one, especially when accounting for their age difference. This thinking has taken a far bigger hold on the imagination of our culture than many realize. When images become commodities, many won't care if a picture of a nude woman is a raw image of a real woman, an adulterated and enhanced image of a real woman, or a picture of a man that has been altered to appear as a woman. In reality, pictures can be altered to make these important differences the same. In Tate's defense, he was probably correct about many of the men who were answering his question out of the rote obligation to not be seen as gay. In real life, far men would likely prefer the appearance of feminine beauty in a biological male than the ability to reproduce in a bland or hideous woman. A recent example was given by the former comedian Pauly Shore. Footnote: although he still identifies as a comedian, I am calling him a former comedian because he is not funny. As a realist, I cannot support the notion that what you identify as can change reality. End footnote. When in an interview he claimed to have slept with a trans woman and that her man-made vagina had given him more pleasure than any natural woman he had been with, and that his preference was to only sleep with trans women going forward. A few people in the comments reported that the comedian had posted that this was a joke and it never happened. One person posted a picture of a tweet that read, "You guys are hilarious. I was practicing one of my jokes out, which actually gets a big laugh on stage. I've never had sex with a transgender woman. These are jokes. But if I did have sex with a transgender woman, I wouldn't write this tweet. I would own it." His X feed was then followed by many similar posts, both about how it never happened, but that if it did happen, or if he was gay, it would be okay and he would own it. This response is paradoxical. Like magicians and wrestlers, a comedian's craft is rooted in the public's acceptance of them as truth tellers, even though we know that is exactly what they are not. We go to see comedians to have them point out the small absurdities of our everyday lives. Our willing self-deception is based on the understanding of narrative and story to communicate truths beyond the factual and analytical. They will tell us exaggerated and fictionalized stories as if they happened, so that we can identify with the kernel of common experience. His insistence on telling us it never happened to protect his straight sexuality makes the joke completely unfunny, but far worse is what his virtue signal about owning it reveals about the time in which we live. In the 90s, someone could make crass jokes that relied on a common cultural consensus. He made allusions to the man-made vagina having some kind of mechanical function, something that would have pointed to the absurdity of a man-made sex organ 30 years ago. It's likely that the joke does get a big laugh at Pauly's live shows. His audience is made up of Gen Xers who have nostalgic associations with live shows and edgy sex jokes. Yet for the general public, the joke falls flat because people overwhelmingly accepted that what he said could be a true experience and a valid opinion. Though he is usually quite sensible about such things, even Jordan Peterson has fallen into this error of categorization in attempting to divine beauty in the female form. He was harshly critical of Sports Illustrated for putting the plus-sized model Yumi Nu on the cover of their swimsuit edition, but he failed to criticize the publication for putting a trans woman on the cover a year before. Footnotes: I made an article on Peterson fumbling this topic. The link is provided, and I also made a video critiquing his specific claims. Link provided as well. End note. This may seem tangential to the topic of stories and adaptations, but its relevance is found in this. When we choose to reduce stories and characters to a list of empirically verifiable categories, for whatever ends, the story loses its soul. As an example, compare the passages on the left and right sides of the following table. Some words have been omitted and the order has been slightly rearranged to highlight the similarities between the two, but each side comes from a single chapter of scripture. Left. I slept, but my heart was awake. A sound, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my love. Right. At the window of my house, I looked through the lattice. I noticed among the young men. Left. My dove, my perfect one, my beloved put his hand to the latch, and my heart was thrilled within me. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the bolt. Right. A youth, he was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Then out came a woman to meet him. She took hold of him and kissed him. Left. I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. I drank my wine with my milk. Others, eat, friends, drink, and be drunk with love. Right. She said, today I have fulfilled my vows, and I have food from my fellowship offering at home. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you and have found you. Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. Left. For my head is wet with dew. Right. I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. Oh, these are together. My locks left, my locks with the drops of night. I had put off my garments. How could I put it on? I had bathed my feet. How could I soil them? Right. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Left. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and gone. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave no answer. Right. My husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and will not be home till full noon. In this example, both passages speak about biological women, but there are differences between them that are as significant as the difference between a woman and a transsexual. Yet by highlighting the similarities, you might not see what the big deal is. Both have food, myrrh, and an invitation to drink of love. They both begin with the anticipation of lovers meeting and end with the woman alone, and both passages were written by the same author. The passage on the left comes from the Song of Solomon, the height of romantic imagery in the Bible. The passage on the on the right comes from the 7th chapter of Proverbs about the adulterous woman. Much like a trans woman, the passage required some parts to be cut out and rearranged, but once it was done, it seems to serve just as well in providing imagery of romance. The story falls apart when it progresses through the narrative, for what comes next spells doom for the young man caught in her snare. All at once he followed her, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. The narrative of our culture puts the highest value on the appearance of a person or their companions. A few pictures with a hot-looking woman on your arm might be all someone needs to start their social media career. For such a purpose, a transsexual that's a 10 is far better than a cis woman that's a 0. It's about the capture of an image. It's choosing books for their covers instead of what's inside. The adulterous adaptation may have all the appearance of a well-loved story, and the character might even have the same name. But Romeo and Juliet but Romeo and Jules can never make a baby, even if the family accepts their once forbidden love. The Loathly Lady. Nominalism may seek to break down barriers and collapse categories, but it's important to avoid the error of the other extreme. Just as attempts to destroy the cross through changing the angles and straightness of the line ultimately fails to do so, we should not get too fixed on the notion of one true cross. There are many one true crosses and many kinds. The Latin cross in the West, the Greek cross, the Orthodox cross, Coptic, Celtic, and others. Some tribes may claim that theirs is the only real cross, while others might simply insist theirs is the best. Yet all of them do the trick to some extent, and the best cross for one purpose may not serve as well somewhere else. Stories are the same way. Basic tales can be retold with countless variants and even more interpretations. The Jewish tradition of Midrash explores the speculative possibilities that the ambiguities of the text allow, at least until it becomes codified as the Midrash and made official. But the principle still holds true. There are multiple possibilities, and each one creates a forking path that influences what comes next. There's a beautiful story from the tale of King Arthur that takes such forking paths. In each version, it involves a riddle. What is it that women most desire? The answer is required to avoid death or some similar fate at the hands of Lady Modron and her wicked knight. So Arthur and his knights search high and low, seeking answers for a year and a day. In each instance, the answer only comes at the last minute. To get the answer he seeks, Arthur needs one of his knights to consent to the marriage of a loathly lady. Far worse than a female Hulk Hogan, this old crone had a balding head plastered with bits of wispy gray hair. Her skin was covered with purple warts, and her eyes seemed but empty sockets. She smelled of mold and cackled monstrously. Accepting a fate unimaginable to the manosphere, Sir Gawain promises to marry the old crone. In one version, she tells Arthur the secret answer of a woman's greatest desire. And here the stories split, because those whispered words were remembered quite differently. In some versions, Arthur says the greatest desire of women is to rule over men. The MGTOW and Manosphere nod in bitter agreement, or similarly, to have sovereignty over men, or alternately, a woman desires to have her will. Subtle but important differences. At this point, the evil witch, the Black Knight, and the Dark Castle vanish. Having accomplished what he desires, Arthur tries to refuse his earlier commitment, not wanting his nephew, Sir Gawain, to be married to an old crone out of duty and honor. Yet dutiful Gawain insists on keeping his word. When they reach their room, she said, now that we are married, will you kiss your wife? Gawain looked down at her. In her eyes he saw pain and sadness, and feeling deep tenderness for her, he kissed her. The lady shuddered, and her warty skin dropped away. A moment later, a lovely woman with skin as pale as the dawn and clear, dark eyes that shone with love stood before the stunned Gawain. My husband, she cried, I am Lady Ragnell. My sister, Lady Modron, and her evil husband, Lord Gromer, cast a spell on me and told me I would never find a true knight to love me. But you have broken the spell. Now I am my true self. She took Gawain's hand. And now I have one more request to make of you. I cannot always keep this form in which you see me. Do you wish me to be my true self when we are alone in our chambers, or when we are among people? Here is the point where interpretation shuffles things around. One version, in which Gawain seems quite young, he seems unsure of his own desire and does not know what to say. Others provide no deliberation, where the saintly knight goes right to the correct answer, to give his bride the liberty of her own choice. Gawain's heart swelled with love. My dearest, he said, whatever you wish, I will accept. You are the one who suffers. At that, Gawain's bride glowed with joy. Oh, Gawain, my sister said if I found a man who pitied me, I could regain part of my former self. But she said I would never find a knight who would give me the power to make my own choice. Now you have broken the spell completely. However, in most versions, Gawain chooses to have her beautiful in private. The lady then scolds him for wishing her to suffer the leering eyes of the people, and when he agrees with her, questions why he doesn't care that she will be hideous in the private life. This is a very, very typical of conversations between husbands and wives. There is no right answer. What never occurs is that Gawain first chooses to have her be beautiful in public, and I think there is significance to this. Gawain's goodness was first shown by his insistence on keeping his word. He did not expect the old crone to become beautiful ever. All the other men judged that there was nothing of worth in the woman simply by her appearance. Gawain did not marry the woman because he loved her, but because he loved Arthur and the code of chivalry for which his court stood. Arthur put forth the ideals, yet he was willing to bend the rules in such a circumstance. Gawain saw that if the ideals of honor and faithfulness only applied to the times in which it was easy, the rules were ultimately worthless. His actions mirrored the words of Christ. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Matthew 5:43-48. What does the word perfect mean here? Perfect in consistency, dependable and unchanging, trustworthy and true. Just as God delivers sunshine and rain day by day and season by season, a knight's word was meant to be unbreakable. Arthur may have considered it an impossible ideal, but Gawain saw clearly that there was only one way to honor his pledge. To love the ugly is a choice. This is why, when given the choice, Gawain first chooses for her to be beautiful in his private company. He sees no dishonor in having a hideous wife in the eyes of the world. If Andrew Tate posed Lady Ragnell's question to his audience, the truthful answer is that they would rather have Megan Fox on their arm and Hulk Hogan in their bedroom. Footnote: a crass joke from my youth puts truth to this claim. Fat girls are like mopeds, fun to ride till your friends find out. End note. Or more specifically, they would rather plant their seed in the necrotic wound or waste dump of a beautiful-looking eunuch than the fertile soil of a scarred or imperfect woman. If beauty is reduced to facial symmetry and neoteny, carotenoid-rich skin tones, waist-to-hip ratio, and body fat percentage, we can contain the world and harness its power. The tape measure tells us who is beautiful and who is important, because they can attract or command such beauty. We reduce the contents of books to images on their covers. Beauty is something to be captured and stored, preserved and hoarded like a dragon's treasure. St. Thomas Aquinas thought that beauty was made up of three constituent elements: integritas, constantia, and claritas. This sounds remarkably similar to the list of categories above, though the philosophical and theological language lends a poetic elegance to his scientific dissection. Of these elements, integritas, or wholeness, means that a beautiful thing needs to have all it needs to have in order to be what it is. Otherwise, it is deficient and less beautiful than it could otherwise be. Now, there is certainly something excellent and beautiful about the quality of integrity, but in my own observation of what is wrong with the world, I have traced the source of much frustration back to the consequence of those trying to follow St. Aquinas' words and ideas. Much of this stems from Thomas' loyalty to Aristotle and his ideas about divine simplicity. When he reads, "To be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect," he imports a notion of perfection that is totally foreign to the Israelites in Jesus' audience. It's the perfection of uniformity, silence, and immobility. By Aquinas standards, Footnote. Every devoted Thomist will push back on these claims by saying, "You don't really understand Thomas." I am certain of this because this phrase is the only response I have ever heard or read from any Thomist in regards to criticism of St. Thomas and his teaching. End note. By Aquinas standards, or at least the standards of those who took his words to heart, the integritas of a cathedral is at its apex the moment construction ends, and is immediately sullied by the dust dragged in by the feet of the unwashed masses. To further emphasize this point, the most idolized person in most of these cathedrals is the conceptual virgin, a philosophical construct based on the mother of Christ, whose integritas was never compromised by original sin, the birth of her son, or any acts of affection towards the man the world calls her husband. From this logical framework, it was worked out that her perpetually youthful body was removed from our world of corruption to a higher spiritual realm without experiencing death, and apparently without experiencing life. I would suggest that true beauty is ineffable, a characteristic of the divine, and like God himself, it cannot be seen in a static form. It is a fire that burns without being consumed, and the evidence of glory as it passes by. The real error of the nominalist line of thinking comes in believing that people are objects. An image of a person is an object, which is why we can arrive at the same place through various means, by altering the image or altering the body of the subject. But an image of a person is only an image of a person's body, even if it is the perception of our eyes in real time and space. What we see is not the person. Whatever hints of beauty the image may seem to possess, true beauty can only be revealed through time, experienced in the narrative form. People are not seen but known, like the story in a book. It is only through the reading the pages that we know what it's about. Many times, the images on a cover are not understood until the story is known. When the characters are recognized and revealed, we may find repulsion in an image that intrigued us, or beauty in a face that first seemed rather bland. The true source of beauty. It is only through the passage of time that the integritas of an object can truly be seen. Consider the beauty of the kintsugi bowl, the Japanese art of objects repaired with gold. Most people are familiar with the story of these broken objects made beautiful. The gold catches our eye. The randomness of the once cracked lines contrasts with patterns of glazing and the uniformity of the bowl's shape. There is certainly a market for such items, and as demand increases, people have taken to crafting the items in a similar fashion. A big retailer won't rely on the randomness of broken bowls to capitalize on a market trend, so it will take things into their own hands. They will study which type of bowls fetch the highest price and have bowls made to the same specifications. Perhaps they will make molds with the cracked lines pre-scored and a tool to apply pressure in precisely the right way to cause consistent breaks. This will allow the assemblers to develop a routine and apply the gold-colored epoxy in the same way each time. Within a matter of weeks, every Target in the country has a row of identical kintsugi bowls sitting at the eye level of the average 5-foot 3-inch American woman for the reasonable price of $11.99. Perhaps there is a difference in the quality of materials, but even if that is adjusted for, what difference can be found between the genuine kintsugi and the imitation? Why would someone pay thousands of dollars for one and place it somewhere to be seen and admired, while the other one is used to hold mixed nuts? The nominalist way of thinking can provide no true answers. Even the minute details of handmade production can be replicated with enough attention to detail. But the difference is in the story. One story is about a bowl purchased at Target, and its history goes no farther than an industrialized workshop in a foreign country that is not Japan. A woman thought it would look pretty with her other home decor. The other story begins with a culture that learned to survive in a harsh land with poor resources by working harder than others were willing. They developed practices of crafting objects with an exceptional quality, one which they placed their personal worth on which they placed their personal worth. Their personal honor was so great that the failure of their craft work was seen as something worse than death. So they learned to make even simple items like earthenware bowls well enough to last beyond the lifetime of the original owner. This same level of care was placed in training the next generation of craftsmen. To protect the honor of an apprentice, masters would take years to train their students, keeping them from working in their own name until they were absolutely certain they could craft objects of equal quality to their master. This culture, therefore, took the same great care of the objects it purchased and used within their homes. The high quality stoneware and porcelain was used and relied on to perform the task of domestic life. Then such items were passed down to the children and grandchildren of the original owner. The patterns and tool marks became as familiar to the users as they were to the craftsmen, though transformed through the passage of time, through the regular use, the washing and drying, the time in the sun, the expansion and contraction of the seasons. Micro cracks in the glazed veneer, the changing color of an aged patina, the unglazed bottom rim, smoothed out and oil darkened over decades and centuries. Until one day, a startled cat knocks Obachan's bowl to the ground, and it cracks into a variety of different sized shards. The remains are carefully collected by the granddaughter, even the tiny splinters no bigger than a grain of rice. The pieces are placed in a sturdy box that won't be toppled and put to rest in the center of the table, like the casketed body of a loved one at a funeral. Perhaps they remain in that state for quite a while, or perhaps the box was tucked away in storage to be forgotten, maybe for years, or maybe for generations. But at some point, someone decided to pay for the bowl to be repaired, or to learn the craft of kintsugi for themselves. In either way, another quarter of a lifetime was devoted to learning the meticulous skills necessary to repair pottery using toxic lacquer and precious gold. The same level of care and patience that were used to form the bowl and then to cook the food it once held and to keep it clean and safely stored is now applied to putting the broken pieces back together. The bowl is restored to its owners, and in a mirror image of its original owner's story, its days of serving food are now over, and it is given a place of honor to be admired and respected. It shares wisdom with those who are willing to see its value and listen to the story that it tells, and will continue to do so for as many generations as are willing to remember its value. Perhaps eventually its story is forgotten. It ends up on the shelf of an old junk shop. Maybe it catches the eye of a soldier from a foreign land who brings it home as a souvenir. Junior has a soft spot for the bowl Dad got from World War II, but his son just sees more junk. It finds its way to the shelf of a Goodwill, right next to a similar one with the words threshold and made in China stamped on the bottom, bearing an identical sticker reading $2.99. Maybe it ends up holding mixed nuts, or maybe a lover of Japanese art discovers a true treasure, or someone down on their luck discovers the means of keeping their house from foreclosure. Before you come to the conclusion that capitalism and globalization are bad, go back and consider the original source of the kintsugi bowl. It begins with the dust of the earth, the same substance used by God to form the ancestors of all mankind. The craftsman who formed the bowl was formed in a womb based on the prototype formed by the creator of the universe. The animating spirit that moves his hands moves through each of us. The question is, what will we put our hands to? The manufactured bowl may have far more humble beginnings, but its origins do not determine its destiny. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Ecclesiastes 3:11. We are all on a continuum whose beginnings and endings we cannot see, but we have hands and we can choose what we do with them. As my wife reminds our daughters when they start to get violent, hands are for blessing and building. What we build from scratch should be done well, like the craftsman from Japan, but our hands can be a blessing to everything they come across, no matter how humble its origins. I consider in my own home a relatively cheap plaster bust of William Shakespeare. In the 1950s or 60s, it was a trendy piece of home decor, not unlike the decorative bowls found at Target. To my Nano and Nana, it was a symbol of their attainment of the American dream, along with other items like the frame prints of Gilbert Stuart's unfinished portrait of George Washington and Franz Hall's Laughing Cavalier. I would sit in the den and open pages at random from the copy of the Iliad from the small bookcase next to the TV. The cups and saucers that held my milk and cookies, and the plates on which my cold cut sandwiches were served, had come from promotions offered at local banks, green and white in a pattern called English ironstone. They were exactly as precious back then as anything purchased at a big box store now. But these were the items that my father and uncles, my cousins and siblings, chose to keep and protect in special places of honor in our homes. The image of our family group text is of a black and gold metal platter with red roses in the center, from which we still serve food on holidays, along with a cracked and repaired, though not with gold, soup tureen. It's a sad fact that most of these artifacts are no longer in our possession, and no one has the space to keep everything accumulated by their parents and grandparents over the course of a lifetime. The bust is all I have in my own home. But as long as that object remains, there is a chance of resurrecting those memories, and I am reminded of the kindness and love of my grandparents. This makes me wonder, am I becoming the type of man that my children and grandchildren will remember as fondly? He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has done this through us. He will do it through us, even if we are the ones who break the bowl. But perhaps we can also be the ones to find the shards and fix it. The most beautiful woman in the world. The ugliest woman I have ever seen is part of the most beautiful stories I have ever heard. It is not long. It came from Facebook, from the account of a very unfortunate man whom I've never met in person. He is of my parents' generation and graduated from the same Bible college that I attended. He would send out friend requests to anyone who had connections to the school, and on anyone's birthday, he would share a video of himself singing Happy Birthday in a rich tenor voice perfectly suited for the old-time gospel music that was sung in Pentecostal churches in the South. One day, a picture came across my timeline that made me feel disturbed and uncomfortable. He looked about 50 years old in the picture and was smiling with his head tipped to the woman sitting next to him. My first assumption was that it was his mother or grandmother. Her face was severely disfigured. Her right eye was missing, but only the eye. Not only her eye, a significant portion of her skull around the eye socket and a portion of her jaw on the same side. The recess was covered with skin pulled tight around the deformed shape of her skull, and the shrunken side of her mouth had the same asymmetrical pucker as the corner where Popeye held his pipe. The entire surface of her face was covered with warty bumps. I would have believed she was 80 or 90 years old if it weren't for the darkness of her hair. I scrolled past the image quickly until my curiosity demanded I take another look. I took a moment to wrestle with the image before I could focus on the words posted above. It has been 1 year ago today that I came home from work to find my Rose asleep in her chair. We called 911 and they came and took her to the hospital, and the next morning, the most beautiful woman in the world was taken to heaven. I think at one point, before I was a husband and a father, I would have assumed that he was simply saying what a dutiful husband is supposed to say. Her deformities had come from cancer that required significant portions of her face and skull to be removed. I have known many Christian men and women who take the vows of marriage with full sincerity and have seen many people show love and compassion to a spouse who had suffered tragedies of various kinds. But I think I was under St. Thomas' assumption that the integritas of beauty truly fades when youth and health begin to vanish. I do not think this is the case. I am convinced that this man took his vow to love his wife in sickness and in health as seriously as Sir Gawain and experienced a miracle just as amazing as the good knight. If a picture of beauty can be made many ways, through the observance of natural beauty, the alteration of the picture, or the alteration of the subject, then it is equally possible that a picture of beauty can be perceived through the transformation of the eyes. The statement that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder is true, but it's not an illusion. I have seen it by seeing through his eyes. I have experienced it in my own life. I said he's an unfortunate fellow because, like many widowers, he doesn't seem to manage his life well on his own. He has health problems and money problems and struggles greatly in managing his affairs, often pleading for assistance on his Facebook wall. The thing that not only made his life work, but made it a joy, was the presence of a loathly crone whose value Andrew Tate could never comprehend. People often decry the lack of beauty in our modern world. They look to the cathedrals of Europe as examples of a better world. Yet Jesus never once condemned the world for lacking beauty. He condemned those who took pride in Herod's temple. His chief act was healing the eyes and ears of the blind and deaf. The problem with our generation is not a lack of beauty, but eyes that cannot see. The measurements and categories will always tell us lies. The truth is found in action, and it's learned through telling stories.